The footage doesn't show her stopping, but rather dissolving into the drywall like smoke sucked into a vacuum. I watched the timestamp tick forward while she walked backward into what should have been an empty stretch of corridor. There was no door there, no hidden passage, just painted cinder blocks stretching endlessly down the sterile hallway. Her uniform remained pristine, untouched by the impossible friction of merging with solid masonry. The motion sensor triggered again when she reappeared moments later, stepping forward from the exact same spot. I checked the blueprints 3 times, convinced I had misremembered the layout of the old wing. Every architectural record confirmed that section was a dead end behind a reinforced load-bearing wall. Yet the camera captured her smile widening as she turned away, unaware that her feet were no longer touching the floor. The audio feed picked up a wet, grinding sound that shouldn't be possible in an empty room. I paused the video to examine the pixels around her legs, searching for digital artifacts or editing errors. Instead, I saw the texture of the wall ripple like water disturbed by a submerged object. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, cold and suffocating. She wasn't walking into the wall because she was trapped inside it. The camera wasn't recording a hallway, it was filming from inside her own ribcage. The time-lapse camera never blinked, capturing 7 years of decay in a living room that should have been empty. In the first frame, Barnaby, the golden retriever, sat perched on the sofa, his tail thumping a rhythm against the dust-covered cushions. Day by day, the light shifted across the floorboards, marking seasons that no human hand ever touched. Yet Barnaby remained, his fur thinning, his eyes clouding with a cataract haze that deepened into obsidian voids. He did not eat, he did not drink, and he certainly did not leave the confines of that beige armchair. The windows stayed shut, the curtains drawn tight against a world that had moved on without them. Neighbors reported seeing nothing but silence from the house, their calls to the owners going unanswered for months, then years. But in the accelerated footage, Barnaby's breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible, a shallow rise and fall of ribs that seemed to defy biology. His skin sagged over bones that looked too sharp, too brittle, for a creature that had not aged a single second since he was bought at the pet store. The final frames show him collapsing forward, his head resting on the carpet, lifeless yet perfectly preserved in amber-like stillness. Police eventually broke down the door to find only a skeleton draped in fur and a camera still rolling. They found no food bowls, no water dishes, no signs of entry or exit, only the relentless progression of time acting on flesh that should have turned to dust long ago. It was then that they noticed the reflection in the darkened television screen, showing not the empty room but a family standing behind the dog, holding him upright with invisible hands, forcing him to live just so they could keep watching. The timestamp on the dashcam glowed a steady digital green, marking a date 3 days after I was pronounced dead in my own driveway. At 3:14 a.m., the grainy footage shows the passenger door unlatching without sound, sliding open into the humid night air. A figure drags themselves into the seat, their limbs moving with the jerky, unnatural rhythm of broken marionette strings. They settle heavily against the cracked leather, exhaling a plume of vapor that fogs the interior lens momentarily. The camera's night vision mode struggles to define their features, rendering them as a smudge of static and shadow. I watched this file on my laptop, my heart hammering against ribs that should have been still, confused by the impossible chronology of the data. The figure raises a hand not to touch the dashboard, but to adjust the side mirror, staring directly into where my eyes used to be. Their mouth opens in a silent scream, or perhaps a whisper, as they turn their head toward the driver's seat with terrifying familiarity. I recognized the tattered coat immediately. It was the one I had buried with me in that unmarked plot behind the old oak tree. The figure reaches out, fingers brushing the steering wheel, and for a second the static clears to reveal my own face, pale and bloated. Then, from the backseat where no passengers should exist, I heard the distinct click of the child lock engaging from the outside. The static on the baby monitor didn't just hiss, it breathed in time with my own ragged sleep. I woke to the soft, off-key humming of a lullaby I hadn't realized I knew until that very moment. The video feed showed our nursery bathed in the pale blue glow of the nightlight, empty and still. My wife was asleep beside me, her chest rising and falling in the dark, yet the voice singing through the speaker was unmistakably hers. It whispered promises of eternal sleep to a child who had been dead for 3 years. I tried to scream, but my throat felt filled with wet cotton, stifling any sound before it could leave my lips. The camera panned slowly, as if held by an invisible hand, focusing on the empty crib where dust motes danced in the beam of light. The singing grew louder, clearer, stripping away the static until I could hear the saliva click in her throat. She turned over in our bed, groaning softly, completely unaware that she was currently performing for an audience of one. I reached for the phone to call for help, but my fingers passed through the screen like it was made of smoke. The voice on the monitor smiled, a wet tearing sound that vibrated through the plastic casing. You thought you were listening to the recording from last night, but the timestamp displayed was today's date right now. The security feed didn't show them dying. It showed them being unmade by something that had no right to exist in the crushing dark of the ocean floor. For 3 days, the crew of the abyssal drilling rig had hammered against the reinforced titanium hatch, their voices screaming not in pain, but in a desperate, unified plea for entry. I watched the timestamps loop over and over, mesmerized by how their shadows stretched toward the metal barrier as if pulled by an invisible gravity well. The pressure sensors indicated nothing outside but empty water and miles of suffocating blackness, yet they insisted there was a sanctuary waiting on the other side. When the hydraulic locks finally disengaged with a groan that sounded too much like a human sigh, the entire team fell silent in unison. They stepped through the doorway not with fear, but with the reverent gait of pilgrims entering a holy shrine. The camera angle remained fixed, capturing their departure as they vanished into the absolute darkness beyond the threshold. But they did not walk into the water. They walked into a space that the lens simply refused to record. One by one they disappeared from the frame, leaving behind nothing but the empty air of the corridor and the faint smell of ozone. I scrubbed the footage backward, trying to find the point where reality began to fracture, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was waiting for them. Instead, I saw that the door had never been locked from the outside at all. The final frame froze on the open hatch, revealing that we were watching the recording from the other side. We are not the ones looking in, we are the ones who have already stepped out. The motion alert pinged on my phone at 3:17 a.m., showing a shadow standing in the corner of our sealed basement. I dismissed it as a glitch, blaming the old wiring for triggering the sensor on empty air. But when the notification returned 3 days later, the silhouette was slightly taller, its edges sharper against the grainy night vision. By the second week, the figure had distinct shoulders and a head that tilted toward the lens with unnatural curiosity. I installed a second camera to confirm it wasn't a trick of the light or a stray animal squeezing through a crack. The new feed showed the same shape, now clearly wearing something resembling clothes, standing perfectly still in the dark. I called the police, but they found nothing but dust and silence when they searched the concrete room. Yet every night at 3:17 a.m., the app screamed that someone was there. On the 14th day, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that looked disturbingly like my own sleeping profile from upstairs. I realized then that the basement door hadn't been locked to keep things out. It had been locked to keep something in. The shadow wasn't invading our home. It was waiting for me to come down and join it. The security feed from the decommissioned Metro Line 4 didn't show an empty platform, but a crowded one. Passengers in coats that haven't been in style for 30 years stood motionless as the automated doors hissed open. No train ever ran on this line after the flood sealed the tunnels in 1992. Yet the carriages glided into view with impossible silence. I watched through the grainy monitor as they stepped aboard, their movements jerky and synchronized like marionettes pulling tight strings. The camera zoomed in automatically, a feature I hadn't programmed, focusing on the face of a woman holding a child who looked too old to be hers. As they crossed the threshold into the carriage, their features began to smear, dissolving into static gray noise. One by one, the crowd boarded, each face losing its definition, until only hollow voids remained where eyes and mouths should have been. The train doors closed without a sound, sealing them inside that metal box as the lights flickered out completely. I reached for the phone to report the anomaly, but the line was dead, just as it has been for decades. Rewinding the footage, I noticed the timestamp wasn't moving forward. It was counting backward toward the night of the flood. The passengers weren't entering a train that had arrived. They were leaving a world that had already ended. Now I understand why the station remains abandoned, because we are not watching history, we are recording our own evacuation.